Hello and welcome to another episode of the FHS Podcast. My name is Ali from The Bench, and we have a very special guest today. We have Henry Coutinho-Mason, who is our speaker at FHS, and he's been a speaker in the past. We got a very positive response from our audience in Abu Dhabi when we ran Future Hospitality Summit last year, and Henry's back with some amazing insights to share with our audience in Saudi Arabia this April, May. And well, thank you for joining us, Henry.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited both to be on this show, but also to join you again in Riyadh in a few weeks.
Yes, we're so happy to have you, Henry. For those who don't know, obviously, I'm connected with you on LinkedIn. I see some of the posts that you send out, and you got your perspective on some of the technologies that are disrupting our future. But why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so the session that I'm going to be running in Riyadh is how to design a people first AI strategy for hospitality. And it's interesting because one of the reasons why I've spoken with you guys a number of times before is because I'm actually not a hospitality expert at all. My background is I ran a trend and innovation agency for 10 years, and then I've written a couple of books on trends and innovation in the future. And this was really my USP, if you like, is coming from outside an industry and helping people understand what is happening in the rest of the business, the social, the economic, the cultural landscape that they can use to seize future opportunities, emerging opportunities. Because fundamentally, my core belief is that actually, you mentioned LinkedIn, I call myself on LinkedIn a reluctant futurist, which people are always intrigued by, given that I wrote a book called The Future Normal. And I say, it's because, right, I think too often if we think of futurism, we think of flying cars and drones and whether it was AI, facial recognition, we think of something like this coming, increasingly soon, but in the distance. But actually what I believe is the best way to anticipate the future is to look at other parts of the world, other demographics, other sectors where your future is already happening today. So that's the approach I'm going to be bringing, very focused on AI, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, but I'm really delighted. I love the audience, and I love thinking about how what I'm seeing can be tailored to a hospitality audience, because of course it's an amazing industry doing amazing things for people.
Well, yeah, it is, but let's talk a little bit about what you just said. You said that you call yourself a reluctant futurist. And of course, you're an author. You've written the book, The Future Normal. So tell us, what does that mean? What's a reluctant futurist?
Yeah, I touched on one of them. I think that there is so much opportunity to anticipate the future by looking at today. So that's part of it. The other reason, I do a lot of work with executive audiences. My other kind of disdain, if you like, hatred is maybe a bit strong, but for the concept of futurism is it feels like very disempowering, right? It feels like you're passing the buck. It's like, okay, yeah, we'll wheel out this guy who's and it's typically often a guy, right, who's going to think about the future, and they'll produce the reports, right? And then we kind of tick that box. And I just don't think that's acceptable or really viable in the current world where everything is moving so fast. I think you have to engage with the future. And most important, you need your entire organization to engage with the future, right? It's not even just enough for the people who are going to be in the room in Riyadh, the executives, the leaders, the investors, to have a view on the future. You need your entire organization to be thinking about how we can not just respond to the future, but actually start creating it ourselves. And so that's the other message that I really want to give. And again, in all of my keynotes, whatever I'm talking about, I really try to make it accessible, right? This is not someone sitting in an ivory tower saying, oh, I've been thinking about this for weeks, months, or I've spoken to lots of people. Here's what's going to happen. This for me feels like a very dated model of futurism. What I want this to be is really a way of seeing the world that empowers people to say the things that I see in my day-to-day life. I open my social media feed, I'm reading magazines on the plane or whatever, and when I see things, new businesses, new startups, new products and services coming into the marketplace. Actually the things that threaten to overwhelm us as business leaders, right? This era of hyper competition that we're all in, thinking, how the hell do I keep up? Actually, I think it's those very things that are threatening to overwhelm us. It's the innovations that are all around us. The new innovations are actually our way of seeing what's coming next, and that's really, if you like, the methodology, the approach that I teach, if you like, in my keynotes. I say here, I'm going to share with you examples of 20 or 30 case studies of how businesses are deploying these new technologies, responding to these new social behaviors, new cultural expectations. Let's think about together, and also when you leave the conference, right, go back to your team and think about, you've seen how other organizations are manifesting these changes, right, launching new products today. How does that change how you think about your future in the weeks and months ahead? And that, I think, is a much more empowering approach, rather than just sitting back and saying, let's think about 2050 and how it's going to be different. And this is really about getting people to engage with the future.
You mentioned flying cars in the beginning of this conversation, and I was thinking to myself how, when I was a kid, Back to the Future was one of the most popular movies, and I have a VHS cassette, and I've seen it. I can read the dialogue in my head line by line. I know all the lines that Michael J. Fox delivers in the trilogy. And of course, flying cars was predicted. Movie was made back in 1985, and they show a future 30 years from then, 2015, and maybe that's what set the precedent of the flying cars as well, because that was a hugely popular movie. So you would imagine that the most creative people out there who are sat there creating these visions of the future and putting them into a movie script will get some of it right, but some of it they did get right. But are we thinking this the wrong way? Are we thinking about the future, in your opinion? Do we tend to think of it in the wrong way?
Yeah. So it's funny you say that. I mean, two thoughts on this. Number one, flying cars are actually finally coming, right? The electric vertical takeoff and landing cars that you will have seen, and Dubai, right, is one of the leading markets in this space, right? Going to become a regulatory sandbox for this, which of course is very challenging. What is a futurist going to do when this trope of futurism is actually upon us, right? Well, what is our next flying car for the next 50 years, right? But that's a kind of a sideshow, because actually I think your real question that was actually quite profound, and it's something which I really, will tackle head on. There's a great quote from Jeff Bezos, and I use it in the book, and I use it in a lot of presentations. And he said, he was being interviewed on stage by a journalist who was saying, Jeff, what does the future of retail look like? What are you working on? What's exciting? What new things can you share with us? And he said, it's interesting. I'm always asked this question. What's changing? What should you be excited about that you haven't yet seen? And he said, and no one ever asked me the other question, the other side of this question, which is what's not changing. And he said, I put it to you that for me and my leadership team, as a business operator, it's interesting for journalists to say what's different. But he said, for me and a leadership team, what is not changing is the far more interesting question, because these are the things that we can build our business around for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So actually, you talk about the flying cars are kind of the symbol of novelty, if you like, right? The symbol of how the future will be different. And in a way, this is what we tried to do with the book, actually. One of the reasons why we called it the future normal was because actually this is almost a jarring concept in our head. We don't want the future to be normal, right? We expect our whole cultural expectations around futurism is we want to know what's going to be different. And actually, and I think this is where it's incredibly relevant and powerful for hospitality brands, is actually the most interesting things, will be the things that stay the same. Right. And of course, we'll have new technologies, whether that's AI, facial recognition, drones, flying cars. Right. Of course, slightly less so it was from technology. There'll be new materials, right? Synthetic biology, all of this. There will be so much novelty in our world. But the message that I would like, I will bring to the stage in Riyadh, but even on this session, right, is to reinforce with people that actually, of course, the businesses that win, the hospitality businesses that win in 2030 and 2040 and 2050, probably in 2100 as well, will be the ones that actually still deliver the same things that the businesses that won in 1910, right, 1920. Amazing service, right? Give people an experience that for them, for their family, for those around them, that they remember for the rest of their lives, right? I mean, look, if that's your brand, right, there will be other hotel brands that will just be all about pure automation, speed, low cost, and a bed for the night, right, when you need it, right? It's just a very functional thing. But, and of course, you need, as a leader, you need to pick where you are on that spectrum. But when you think about the future, it's important as well to think about what won't change, right? To think about the people. And this is really what I'm going to be talking about in Riyadh is, everyone is losing their minds around AI, right? It's the kind of the big tech hype wave of this year, last year, next year. But it's actually to bring this back to how do you design a people first AI strategy, right? How do you design a strategy that uses AI to help you deliver the things that actually you're already delivering today and deliver tomorrow? Because that's how to get the organizational alignment that will carry you into the future successfully, right? If you just have everyone rushing off, going, let's try this AI, this AI, that AI, you're just rushing around with no strategy, no alignment. And I would suggest, that is not a strategy for success as we go forward, right? The businesses, and going back to the Amazon example, when I work with clients, I often pause at this and I say, for Jeff Bezos, it's complete confidence that if you ask every single person in Amazon, what are our customer North Stars? He says, we know that no customer is going to come up to us in the future and say, love Amazon, but wish you had higher prices and slower delivery times. This will never, ever happen. These are their core needs. And I say to, how many organizations can you ask, what is still going to be true for our customers in 10 years and be confident that every single person in your organization will give the same answer? This is actually, if that is your starting point, then you think about the future and the technologies and how you layer and how you deliver on those basic human needs and wants more successfully. That's where I think it gets really interesting.
Very interesting thoughts there, right? So what you're saying is underlying every business and every customer for business are these basic needs, and we need to understand those basic needs and how to continue delivering them. Perhaps, is your message then to embrace the technology to ride this wave and find the opportunity?
Well, it goes both ways. I mean, fundamentally, yes, right? Of course, every organization, will have to embrace technology, but of course, how you embrace it is much more diverse. Right? And the example I would give, people always want there to be a single answer, a silver bullet trend, if you like, an opportunity. What is, I'm this company, I'm in this sector. What should I do? And I always say, look, there is such a diversity, and we've touched on this, the one extreme of automation, one extreme of, very hyperhuman, hyper-personalized luxury. But, think about, say, the music industry as an example. On the one hand, you have Spotify, infinite choice, algorithmically curated, very low cost, it's all digital. On the other side of the market, you have the music industry. In the music industry, you have virtually every country in the world, you have vinyl sales reaching 20, 30-year highs in their sales. And it's not even as simplistic as to say, one customer wants one thing and the other one, wants the other, right? It depends on the job, the moment in their week, right? When I'm commuting to work, I just want to pull out my phone, chuck on my headphones and press a button and have music, right? Personalized music or personalized podcasts recommended to me algorithmically. It's convenience is the job for me at that moment. Friday night, I've had people around for dinner, getting out the vinyl record that I've spent $50 on because it's a rare reissue, sourced it from, some shop, the guy imported it. That is doing a very different job for me. It's not really just about the music. It's about the status. It's about the identity. It's about who I am. The very inconvenience of it is the point, right? What I choose to spend my money on tells something about me. So, it's about understanding your customer journey, and it's about understanding when you need to deploy technology and in what context. Is it about a technology of automation, about convenience, about acceleration, right? Or is it about bringing humans to the fore? And I think that kind of customer journey, understanding your customer journeys, understanding the ways you can use technology, is the foundation of any successful business. But the other thing I would just add is, again, one of the most interesting things as I immerse myself in this world and we see some of the use cases is when businesses explore these concepts in slightly more surprising ways, right? And I'll give you an example of that, right? One of the things that we kind of have fallen back on is this idea that humans will be empathetic and, robots and algorithms are functional, right? They're all about convenience. And I'm fascinated by when people actually break that expectation, the conventional wisdom. And I'll give you an example of this, right? I've been looking at healthcare recently, and there's a company called Bridge, and it's a medical kind of chatbot, right? And the doctor, the clinician, with the consent of the patient, turns on the chatbot when they're having the consultation, and it's like a co-pilot for a doctor. It sits there, it records the conversations, and then it writes up the notes for them. But it does something really interesting. It writes up the notes in a kind of structured, nomedical format for the doctors, right? Plugs into the electronic health record. But for the patients, it writes up notes in layperson's terminology. So what you actually find is that the doctor is freed from the note taking. So a doctor can spend more time on the face-to-face interaction with the patient because they're not worried about capturing the information, right? It's all being recorded. It's all being filed in the correct way, format that it should be. But the patient gets a better experience. And there's got some evidence. Patients prefer these notes because there's no jargon, right? It's written as if you're a 10-year-old, right? It's written in very easy to understand language. And so we see technology being used to increase the levels of empathy that humans can have in their interactions, right? So it's not necessarily this conflict of humans do one thing, technology does the other thing, right? It's about how can you use technology, as I said, in a way that enhances the human interaction. And so I think, and just seeing examples after example of this, it's really interesting. Like there's a coffee shop in Shanghai, and they use a robot barista, right, to make the coffee. So, the idea is, actually, robots can make better cups of coffee than human can, right? Because it's consistent. So they get it perfectly right every time, right? And of course, we will see automated coffee shops with no staff members, right? And, of course, some people will just use it to strip out the cost and, as you say, reduce the price. But what they do is they have human waiters to bring your coffee to the customers because their logic there, right, is that actually part of the coffee drinking experience is understanding more, learning about coffee, right? So it's almost like a coffee sommelier. So you have an app, you can tailor your coffee, the way the coffee is made by the robot. It's called Ratio. And the idea is you can slide up and down how much milk you want, how the temperature you want it, the type of coffee, right? You can create this kind of perfect coffee for you, but they have a human to talk you through that experience, right? So they increase the value of the customer experience. And so I'm fascinated by businesses, that are playing around with how and where will we use technology. It's not just going to be about increasing speed and reducing costs, right? That's the very obvious imagination of how we will use technology and robots and algorithms, etc., AI, right? To do more, to do it faster, to do it cheaper. But I think there's a really interesting question especially for hospitality brands, right? Because there can only be one cheapest hotel in town. And that's a really tough race to win. It's a race to the bottom. Most people compete on other dimensions, right? So thinking about how you can use technology to compete on the experience, I think is a really fascinating question, and we'll be exploring a lot of ideas around this in Riyadh.
Very fascinating, especially like the doctor's example that you gave, and makes perfect sense, right? Because that's what the patient needs, and it can be that process can be sped up, and I can be told in regular language what is wrong with me, then I would prefer that, and lets the doctor focus on what he or she is supposed to focus on, and gets me the app that I need. But just because you've touched upon this, could you give us like an example of how this could work in the world of hotels? Like, you are a futurist or reluctant futurist, as you call it. In your view, what could this look like for let's say a hotel check-in experience, or a hotel, let's assume that's not going fully automated. They want to keep the bit of a personal touch. And I know you'll talk more about this in Riyadh. But I was just while you were talking, I was wondering, what could that look like? What is that future for a hotel?
I'll give you an example. There's a restaurant that just opened 2 weeks ago in New York, and it's by the founder of Chipotle. So, really experienced restaurant operator. And it is partially staffed by robots, right? It is like, if you like, robot augmented. And what he's doing is really interesting. So each restaurant, each outlet requires just 3 members of staff. Right? So you think about how many normally, right? Cleaning, front of house, back of house. And it got me thinking, right, this is a really interesting idea. So his things, he wants to break the kind of the muck job nature of many fast casual dining restaurants. Like it's low pay, minimum wage, high turnover, right? So you think, like, imagine if you're a hospitality brand, imagine if you could take 80% of your current payroll and give it to 20% of your staff, right? Increase. So we know, right, how magical, like, you get a really experienced front of house. Imagine if you could slash your workforce by 80%, right? But you didn't just cut your payroll by 80%. What you did is you hired the absolute best in the world in that remaining 20%, right? And you had, and I think that, again, as I said, there will not be one right answer. And I wrote about this, like, when I was just thinking through this in terms of the restaurant experience, I could see, again, 2 ends of the spectrum. You could have a restaurant where the food was all automated, right? The food preparation, but it was all about the experience. And it was just really fun. The waiters were amazing. They were super energetic. And that was really what you're going for. Or on the other end of the spectrum, you could have a chef who was an amazing chef, but kind of terrible at all the rest of the customer experience, right? Terrible at all, understanding how to order, managing the restaurant, no wait staff. And if I was a diner, like, would I go and would I, have my food plated for me by or maybe not plated, but, delivered to me by a robot, right? The robot cleaner, like, it was completely impersonal, but I knew there was one chef and I could maybe see him and he was like, and everything else was robot, had robots delivering, right? So he could just focus on the cooking. And so I think, if you have that thought experiment at each end of the spectrum, I think that's really interesting. But the overall thing is, how could you, and this is, I'm working on a piece on this at the moment. In my mind, I think there is a really interesting provocation that says the future of work will be less but better. And of course, you can interpret that, in the context of your brand. But I do think, if you stripped out all the costs in running a hotel, many of the cleaning staff became, automated, right? It was robots, many of the back of house, right? So, but you could then take some of those wages and employ that, and funnel that into front of house and deliver, a really rich guest experience. And that might be focused on the dining part. It might be focused on the entertainment. It might be focused on whatever it is, the guides, the experiences around the island that you're on, whatever that might be, right? But it allows you to hire, even better people, pay them better, reduce the turnover, increase the value of the human connection and the human experience that you give to your guests in a way that actually is great for the employees as well. I think the future of the guest experience is the future of the employee experience in many ways.
Henry, when we spoke to our hospitality investment decision makers audience, and when we speak to them about AI and we talk to them about how they feel about it, the most common response we get is they're worried, they're anxious, it's scary. In some ways, you've kind of responded to that already in this conversation. But if in one sentence I was to ask you, what's your message to them? What would that be?
It is to look at the innovators, the businesses that are deploying these things in a more positive way, right? So example, I gave that Colonel, raising the wages of their wait staff, and use that as inspiration, because we read the doom and gloom all the time in the media, job loss, automation, human obsolescence. Let's look at and celebrate the examples of people who are doing something different and ask, what if it goes right? And then if you're a leader, you're an investor, help make that happen. Let's do this together. Let's build a better future for us all. That's what I hope I can spark some of those thoughts and so hopefully some of those actions as well.
Perfect. Henry, we'll of course see you in Riyadh. Your topic is the future normal, a people-first AI strategy. We'll see you on the stage at Future Hospitality Summit. And thank you for joining us for this podcast. And thank you for your time.
I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me on, and I'll see you in a few weeks.